Canadian leaders tell Pope of church-inflicted horrors. Pope Francis on tour of Canada sought forgiveness for church's role in residential schools that carried out policies to assimilate natives by erasing their cultures. In residential schools, these children were alone and isolated in their pain and sorrow, far from their families and communities. And even worse, stripped of their language, their culture, their identity, said Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada.
With this visit, you're signaling to the world that you and the Roman Catholic Church are joining us on our path of reconciliation, healing, hope and renewal,
said Mary Simon, Governor General of Canada.
I humbly beg forgiveness for the evil committed by so many Christians against the indigenous peoples,
said Pope Francis. Despite outrage, France hosts Saudi Crown Prince. President Macron hosted Saudi Prince Salman, defying criticism which termed it deeply inappropriate due to the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi.
I feel profoundly troubled by the visit, because of what it means for our world and what it means for Jamal Khashoggi and people like him,
said Agnes Callamard, Secretary General of Amnesty International. UN committee calls for repeal of Hong Kong security law. UN Human Rights Committee called for repeal of Hong Kong's controversial security law amid concerns the legislation is being used to crack down on dissent.
Since its enactment in 2020, the NSL, National Security Law, has reportedly led to the arrests of over 200 people, including 12 children. The committee urged Hong Kong to take action to repeal the national security law and, in the meantime, refrain from applying it,
said the Committee for Monitoring Implementation of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, ICCPR. US President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping agree for first face-to-face summit. President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping agreed to schedule their first in-person summit even as China warned the US not to play with fire in Taiwan.
Those who play with fire will eventually get burned. I hope the US side fully understands that,
said Xi Jinping, President of China. China slams US criticism on Sri Lanka crisis. China defended its massive infrastructure ventures and investments in crisis-hit Sri Lanka amid US criticism that it was reasons for the country's bankruptcy.
The China-Sri Lanka practical cooperation has always been led by Sri Lanka with scientific planning and thorough verification with no strings attached. Besides, what China provides for Sri Lanka are almost preferential loans with low interest rates and long terms, which have played a positive part in improving Sri Lanka's infrastructure and livelihood,
said Zhao Lijian, spokesman, Foreign Ministry of China. Willing to extend economic corridor to Afghanistan, China. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi has offered to support the extension of the China-Pakistan economic corridor to Afghanistan.
China hopes to push the alignment of the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, with the development strategies of Afghanistan, support the extension of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, CPEC, to Afghanistan, and share China's development opportunities,
said Wang Yi, Foreign Minister of China. Algeria talks of joining BRICS. Algerian President Abdelmadjid Tebboune has suggested that his country could join the BRICS economic group that includes Russia and China.
The BRICS interest us. They constitute an economic and political force,
said Abdelmadjid Tebboune, President of Algeria. Differences with China can't be ignored, New Zealand PM. New Zealand has consistently expressed concerns about economic coercion, human rights infringement and treatment of Uyghur in Xinjiang.
We will also advocate for approaches and outcomes that reflect New Zealand's interests and values, and speak out on issues that do not. Our differences need not define us, but we cannot ignore them,
said Jacinda Ardern, Prime Minister of New Zealand. Israel demands disbanding of UN inquiry panel. Israel demanded that a UN panel investigating its 2021 war with Palestinian militants be disbanded, condemning remarks made by one of its members as anti-Semitic.
The fight against anti-Semitism cannot be waged with words alone, it requires action. This is the time for action, it is time to disband the commission. This commission does not just endorse anti-Semitism, it fuels it.
Said Yair Lapid, Prime Minister of Israel in letter to Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations.
We are very disheartened by the social media that is controlled largely by, whether it is the Jewish lobby or specific NGOs, a lot of money is being thrown in to try to discredit us.
Said Maloon Kothari, member, UN's Human Rights Council Commission of Inquiry. To gain acceptance, respect human rights, US to Taliban. US mission head to Afghanistan has said, US will continue to hold Taliban accountable for commitments they made to not turn country into a terror haven.
Over the past year in Doha, we have pursued dialogue with the Taliban to address critical issues. We have provided extensive consular services to US citizens, LPRs, and others engaged with the Afghan people. I am glad that we have been able to help many Afghans inside the country and abroad over the past year, but I am humbled by the array of challenges we are still facing in Afghanistan. If the Taliban hope to gain the acceptance of the international community, they must listen to and honor the views of all Afghan people and respect human rights. I appreciate the extraordinary support of international partners and like-minded community, and that together they have sent this clear message to Taliban.
Said Ian J. McCary, Chief of Mission for U.S. Embassy, Kabul. U.S. offers substantial deal to Russia for freeing Americans. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken to speak to his Russian counterpart for first time since Ukraine war as U.S. offers substantial deal for freeing Americans.
We put a substantial proposal on the table weeks ago to facilitate their release. Our governments have communicated repeatedly and directly on that proposal, and I'll use the conversation to follow up personally.
Said Antony Blinken, Secretary of State of United States. U.S. NATO main threats, says new Russia naval doctrine. The U.S. quest to dominate the oceans and NATO's expansion are biggest threats Russia is facing according to a new Russian naval doctrine.
Russia's independent internal and external policy faces countermeasures from the United States and its allies, who aim to preserve their dominance in the world, including its oceans.
Said a newly released Russian naval doctrine. No winners in nuclear war should never be unleashed, Putin. Russian President Vladimir Putin said that there could be no winners in a nuclear war and it should never be unleashed.
As a state party to the NPT and one of its depositories, Russia consistently follows the letter and spirit of the treaty. Our obligations under bilateral agreements with the United States on the reduction and limitation of relevant weapons have also been fully fulfilled. We proceed from the fact that there can be no winners in a nuclear war, and it must never be unleashed, and we stand for equal and indivisible security for all members of the global community.
Said Vladimir Putin, President of Russia. World lucky so far to avoid nuclear war. UN head warned that the world faced a nuclear danger not seen since the height of the Cold War and was just one miscalculation away from nuclear annihilation.
We have been extraordinarily lucky so far. But luck is not a strategy. Nor is it a shield from geopolitical tensions boiling over into nuclear conflict. Today, humanity is just one misunderstanding, one miscalculation away from nuclear annihilation, put humanity on a new path towards a world free of nuclear weapons.
Said Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations at a conference of countries belonging to Non-Proliferation Treaty. North Korea ready to mobilize nuclear war deterrent. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un said his country is ready to mobilize its nuclear war deterrent and for any military clash with the United States.
Our armed forces are thoroughly prepared to respond to any crisis, and our nation's nuclear war deterrence is also fully ready to mobilize its absolute strength faithfully, accurately, and promptly to its mission.
Said Kim Jong-un, Supreme Leader of North Korea. First ship with Ukraine grain leaves Odessa. First shipment of Ukrainian grain since Russian invasion left port of Odessa on Monday under a landmark deal to lift Moscow's naval blockade in Black Sea.
It is expected in Istanbul on August 2nd. It will then continue its journey after it has been inspected in Istanbul.
Said Mevlut Çavuşoğlu, Foreign Minister of Turkey.